Hey there everyone, welcome to a video on Chris Law's Guitar Tuition. Today we're going to be talking about scales. Now the reason I'm doing this video is because I get asked a lot why learn scales, why am I bothering? In a short, you don't actually have to learn your scales to be able to play your favourite songs on the guitar, but if you do learn your scales you're going to be a much better guitar player. You're going to have a much broader understanding of your fretboard. You're going to know what notes to play, what notes not to play. You're going to be able to understand chord makeups a lot better. Obviously chords are made up from notes within a scale in a particular key. You're going to be able to fill in the gaps when strumming those chord progressions, you know, them little sort of country riffs you hear. You're going to be able to write your own songs and improvise a little bit better. And most importantly, you're going to be able to play with other musicians. You know, when you hear like riffs and solos being played over chords in bands or whatever, you're going to be able to do that as well. So just to add, this video, I'm not actually going to teach you how to play the scales. I want you to do that in your own time, but I'm going to teach you what to do once you've learnt the scales and how to move them across the fretboard. So this video needs to be kept as short as possible, obviously. And let's dive straight in. So those of you who don't really understand scales, so a scale lies between two of the same notes. Obviously, if I start on my C note, which is here, and I work in a linear motion, and I go through the chromatic musical scale, and I end here, the same note, but it's the octave higher. So I've got a C note here, and a C note here. Now, the scale, the major scale, for example, for this video, lies between those two notes that are the same. There's an interval of notes, a sequence of notes. They can be tones, semitones, or you might like to call it whole notes, half notes. Or on the guitar, we can say two notes is a whole note, one note is a half note. So for example, if we're starting on the C note and we follow the pattern of a whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, whole being two notes, half being one note, we'll get the C major scale. Let's try that. C, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, and we end on the C note again, which is the octave higher. Okay, so moving on. So what do we do with that now? Well, we don't want to be really playing our scales on a linear movement because that's going to limit us massively on the guitar. We want to be playing the scales across the fretboard, okay? So it's good to start off with a linear movement just to identify the sound of the scale, the pattern, the sequence involved, and also to look at what notes lie within the scale. So anyway, you're going to be learning your 5 major scales in open position. Now when I say open position, I mean between the 1st and the 4th fret, and they contain open strings. So just an example, I'm going to run through the 5 major scales in open position from root to octave. So we start with the C major scale. Then we're going to be learning now G major scale. We're going to be learning our D major scale. Then we're going to be learning our A major scale. And then we're going to be learning our E major scale. Now I want you to learn those scales, 5 major scales from root to octave in open position. I want you to play them over and over and over and over again until you've mastered them to memory. And once you've done that, where do we go from here? Well, in this open position, we still have room to continue past the octave and descending back through the scale and above the root. So I'm going to show you now with the C major scale. Obviously, our notes are going to be C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. But I still have room to find the D, E, F, G, and descending. So I've now played the C major scale from root to octave. I've memorised that. I've now played it past the root and above the octave, past the octave above the root, and I've memorised that. We're going to do the same with the 5 major patterns. You're going to do this in your own time, but I'm just showing you what to do with this once we've learnt them. Okay, so we've now got the G major. Then we're going to go past again, past the octave. Then we have our D major. same with A. We've got the same finally with the E. Well, already we've got a great understanding and knowledge within the open position. So for example, if I'm playing a common chord progression in the key of C, C chord, A minor chord, G chord, and I wanted to kind of fill in the gaps, you know. Now I know the notes within that area, I kind of know what to play in between those chords. I mean, it's not going to be exactly perfect every time, but you're now going to have a much better understanding. Let's have a look. So have a little play around, play some chord progressions, say 3 chords within the key of C, 3 chords within the key of G, 3 chords within the key of D and the A and the E and so on, and try and fill in the gaps. Okay, moving on. So obviously we know the open position now, but how do we move those scales across the fretboard? Now, basically, those of you that already know, I apologise, but those of you that don't, for example, on the guitar, I like to see it as a pattern of notes or a pattern in general that we can fix and move across the fretboard. For example, if I take my E minor chord, now at the moment I have this being played in open position, there's open strings. The nut, which is here, is technically playing the open strings. That's where the open strings come from. If I move that shape, say up 2 frets, I now need to close off the open strings, and I do that by using my index finger as a bar. This now becomes a nut, and I now play this again, and I can now move this pattern right up the fretboard. An E major, E minor shape pattern all across the fretboard can work. Obviously it just changes chords as we go. Obviously E minor, F minor, F sharp minor, G minor, and so on. The same as notes. When it comes to scales, it's no different. Okay? Once we master the pattern, we can move them up the fretboard. We just need to close off the open strings. Now, obviously, the C major scale, played in open position. At the moment, this contains open strings, and the nut here is playing that part. If I move this original C starting note up a whole note to the D note, I now need to close off the open strings, which is now going to be here. So the nut now has moved up here because my original note has moved up here 2 frets, so the nut's moved up 2 frets. I'm now going to need to play these strings on this fret, okay, to close off the open strings that I would have played originally. So I'm going to play the same scale. So I've now played the same C major scale, but I've now moved it up and replaced the open strings. We've now got the G. Now going to be moving the G up a whole note. And then we're going to be doing the same with the D, as we know the D down here. We're now going to be moving this up a whole note. It doesn't matter where we move it to, this is just practice to just get used to moving the pattern. So what we're doing is we're taking an open scale and we're moving it to a closed fixed movable pattern by closing off the open strings. So the A, we're going to be now closing this off. finally the E major. I'll be closing this off. Okay, so we've learnt our major scales, 5 major scales from root to octave. We've memorised those. We've then gone past the octave and above the root in the open position. We've memorised that. We've now learned how to move each of those 5 scales up the fretboard to a fixed movable pattern. Now, how do we improvise on the fretboard? How do we learn the different positions of the same scale on the fretboard? Well, we look at the word caged. C-A-G-E-D. So, for example, if we need to find our 5 positions of a C major scale, we know our first position is the open, where we play it here, and we can play the full scale. Now our next position, if we look at the word cage, is going to be A, C-A, the A major shape. Now those that you know your bar chords, you're going to be much more knowledgeable with this, but those that don't, you can learn this over time. But your A major shape means we're going to play the A major scale in that position. Now my finger that is furthest away from the nut here is where I'm going to be starting this one, and it's an A major shape, which is an A major chord, which is now a C chord because I've gone from C. That's my next C chord. I just now need to play the A major scale in this position. Okay, let's try that. Okay, and the next one is the G, C-A-G. So starting this finger here, which is the furthest away from the nut, we're going to be barring this one here, and we're going to be doing a G major shape. And this is going to be our next C major scale, but using a G major scale pattern. Next one from here is going to be C-A-G-E. So obviously we started here, this one furthest away from the nut, we're going to start here, E major shape. This is going to give us our next C major scale with the E major scale pattern. And finally, C-A-G-E-D, we've spelt caged, it's going to be D now. Obviously our last pattern was here, using this position here, furthest away from that, we're going to bar that, and we're going to do our D major chord now. This is our next and final C major scale pattern, using the D major scale up the fretboard here. Now, likewise, if you wanted to play 5 positions of the G major scale, or 5 positions of the D major scale, or 5 positions of the A major scale, or 5 positions of the E major scale, we just follow the cage sequence. If we start on, say, we want to look at 5 positions of the G major scale, we start on the letter G. The first one will be G. Now, the next G major scale pattern, cage, is going to be E. Starting here, because that's the furthest finger away from that, we're going to bar that, and we're going to be doing the E shape, and that's a G chord as well. The next one, so we're going to be playing, our E major scale there to get our G major scale. Okay, the bar finger is always going to be where we're closing off the open strings, and after that we've got D, so starting here, furthest away from that, we're going to bar that, and we're going to play our D. That's our next G major chord, which again is going to be the G major scale played in that position, and then we're going to be going on likewise to the C, to the A, until we reach our last pattern. Okay, and that is how you find the scales across the fretboard, simplified just by learning a pattern of notes memorising that pattern and closing off the open strings. So I hope this has helped. I just wanted to add, I know we've only spoken about major scales in this video, and you're probably all thinking that there's minor scales and there's pentatonic scales as well, but the thing is, once we learn these major scales and how to move them up the fretboard, we then just remove notes for the pentatonic scale, and the minor scales lie within the major scales. So the relative to the C major scale, for example, its relative minor is the A minor. And how we find that, we just look at the 6th degree of the scale. So we've got C, D, E, F, G, A, and then we just turn that into a minor. It's a relative because they both have the same notes. We just basically start on the A note within the C major scale rather than the C note, and then we start on the A note and we get us A minor scale. Okay, so I hope that's helped. And yeah, I hope you all have a lovely day, and I'll speak to you soon. Thank you.